Hey there, this is Matt with State of Flux, here with another one of my DC movie reviews. Now we've entered the DCEU territory. That's right, it's time to discuss Man of Steel, and I'm quite honestly a little scared to discuss this. This is one that I've been wanting to discuss ever since I first started my channel nearly 5 years ago. But it's one that I had to proceed with caution just because this incarnation of Superman and Zack Snyder have such a beloved following and fan base, and a vociferous one at that, that what I'm about to say is likely to upset them. But I think that my criticisms, though many of them have been said in the past, are not like out of place in this whole thing. The frustrating thing about this movie is that it is a movie at odds with its own messaging. This is a movie that stops at a certain point to tell you that this symbol here literally means hope. Yet the whole film is viewed from a prism of hopelessness. And when I hear the counter to that like, you can't make a Christopher Reeve Superman movie in the present day, I think that is an incredibly cynical stance to take, and completely untrue. Even taking the James Gunn Superman out of the equation, or Smallville for that matter, it's just never been the case. That is a cynical stance to take. The reason that you think that way is because that's the way you think. You view the world cynically. So having a character that literally is the pillar and beacon of hope is counter to your beliefs. So giving this story to Zack Snyder to make was the wrong choice right from the get-go. Because his lens of objectivism does not fit with Superman. That is not how Superman would behave, ever. And I'm fine with doing reinterpretations of character, but you have to get the character right on some level. And this film just simply doesn't. Proof of this concept came when I watched this movie for the very first time with my 10-year-old daughter, whose sole experience with Superman comes from seeing the '78 movie a handful of times, seeing a handful of episodes from the first 7 seasons of Smallville, and seeing the new James Gunn movie. And it's early on in the picture when Jonathan Kent is lecturing Clark for rescuing the sinking bus. And Clark says, "What, would you let me just have them die?" And Jonathan says, "Maybe." And my daughter exclaimed at the television, saying, "That's not Superman! Jonathan would never say that!" She was up in arms over this moment, and if a 10-year-old can see the problem with this, you should be able to as well, as a full-grown adult. That being said, I don't want to diminish the qualities this movie has, because there are some pretty significant ones. I think that as much as I critique Zack Snyder, filmmaker, I don't critique Zack Snyder, the visual artist, though the muted color palette seems to go work in tandem with this hopeless world that we've gotten presented to us. It's also that he is able to genuinely make every frame a painting. That applies to Zack Snyder more than most directors. Almost everything in any one of his movies, but particularly this one, feels like you could take a screen grab of it and have it on your wall as a piece of canvas art, and it would be inspiring and beautiful. He knows how to frame a movie. He knows how to present tremendously heroic imagery, and that goes a long way for a movie that I don't like. Along with that, Henry Cavill looks like Superman more than any other human being I have ever seen who has walked this planet. He just looks and radiates Superman. It's unfortunate he never truly got to play the character, except for in a couple of brief moments that we'll touch on in a few movies from now. He never really felt like Superman. He certainly looked like him, and if you paused a movie and said, "Who's this?" people would say, "That's Superman." But if you listen and you watch his actions, he's not Superman. And that's disappointing, because Henry Cavill is fantastic. This movie gives us a really good Perry White in Laurence Fishburne. Amy Adams, I like where this movie started in its approach. It never commits to anything. I think David Goyer is an interesting writer in that he's not particularly good, yet he has his name attached to some incredible movies, but usually those movies are helmed by incredible masters of their craft, i.e. Christopher Nolan with Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, Guillermo del Toro with Blade 2, but his work also can be incredibly sloppy and not particularly good in other moments. Like, he gives interesting perspectives on the stories that he writes and his adaptations of his comic book characters. But it's not always ones that I agree with, and I think he kind of gets lost in the weeds of how to structure his own stories. In this one, he's very much trying to riff on what he did for Batman Begins. Batman Begins is a story told out of sequence and stuff like that, but all the pictures come together to paint for you who Batman is and how he began. He basically forces that same framework into this, but a lot of the scenes seem mismatched, and it doesn't inform us the way it ought to. There's weird stagnant jumps that don't have any connection to each other, and I don't know if that's because Zack Snyder tinkered with the editing and structure of the story himself, or if it's a David Goyer thing. But regardless, David Goyer did present an issue, which is that the first part of the movie gives us this great epic prologue to the destruction of Krypton that's really powerful. And then it's giving a Superman story from Superman's perspective, and then it shifts gears when it introduces Lois Lane to Lois Lane's perspective, and you feel like it's sort of an adaptation of Superman for All Seasons, which is one of my favorite Superman stories, and you think that Lois Lane is going to be telling this story, and that's how we're going to learn who Superman is throughout the thing, but that kind of gets abandoned, and it never really comes back to this. Like, the structure of how we view the film is never really cemented, and that's just like a strange writing choice. I think you would have been better served as a film about Lois Lane uncovering this incredibly interesting thing, learning this man's hero, his identity, and then presenting this movie to us that way, rather than the movie that we got. But to do that, you can't really show us the Krypton boom thing, and we want Krypton boom in the beginning because it's very, Avatar had just come out and we wanted to just riff on that, but instead of have everything be blue, we're going to have it muted and beige. So yeah, that's another thing. I do want to touch on this briefly. I'm kind of dinging the opening sequence, but I do think it's the best version of Krypton Go Boom that we've ever gotten on film. That being said, Krypton is not particularly interesting to look at. A lot of it just feels pretty evocative of Avatar, but less visually interesting. And then when you get with like the Kryptonian technology, you have that one like mother bot thing that kind of does like its nanotech, but that's really it. There's nothing else of significance here. Otherwise, they're just looking like gods and statues and stuff like that. And if that's the case, then that's what you want. And what's wrong with like Joel Schumacher's take on Batman Forever, right? I don't know. I think that they could have done more into creating an own world for Krypton. Even if we're going to spend a little bit of time with it, it would have been more impactful when we saw who the ultimate villain is, which is Michael Shannon, who comes in, and he seems to be the only one in the film to understand the assignment, to have read the script and figured out exactly what type of movie he should be in, because he's the only one breathing life into this goddamn thing. He is so incredibly good and engaged. And he's just fantastic. There's a lot of biblical parallels to Superman. That's always been the case, and something that really gets riffed on here, as it was in the Richard Donner films. And this very much feels like a reworking of Superman 1 and 2, just mushed into one 2 hour and 10 minute film. It's a tighter movie, and at times it seems to work, but at times it doesn't. It seems to go for this hard sci-fi thing, and that was pretty engaging up until it becomes a superhero slugfest. But with the muted color palette, and these characters being so overpowered, you find yourself rooting for the vaguely blue blur instead of the vaguely black one, and that became kind of problematic for me. I think the action in the back half of this film is really kind of uninspired. Yeah, I have mostly problems with this movie. I haven't touched on the two biggest ones, which is possibly the worst scene in any Superman movie, and the other one is the folly of Jonathan Kent. Jonathan Kent's death has always been a significant moment for the Superman story. It's the exact moment that Clark learns about human fragility and that he can't save everyone. That's the point. That's the reason why Jonathan Kent has to die. No matter what powers Superman has, all of his incredible abilities, he can't stop a heart that's weakened. Or you can't save a heart that's weakened, and a heart is going to stop no matter what. It's only got a certain amount of beats in it, and once it hits its final one, sometimes you can't do anything to undo that. And so that's the significance of Jonathan Kent. That was the significance in the Donner movie, that was the significance on Smallville, it's been the significance in many a rendition of the comic book works. And here we have a Superman who we as an audience knows he can save Jonathan, who's standing in the line of a tornado, who just looks at his son and goes. And to us as an audience, and certainly to my 10-year-old child, she's like, what? Why doesn't he just save him? And I was like, well, because Jonathan asked him not to. Because if he had shown himself, though he's faster than a speeding bullet, nobody would have seen, because they're fleeing anyway. There's no benefit to this outside of to layer your own child, adopted, with guilt as to not being able to do the thing he knows he is capable of doing. I hate that scene, it's a terrible scene, and yet that's not the worst scene in this film. The worst scene in this film is the scene where Clark is standing up to the bullies inside the bar who throw the beer at him. And he does the thing. He does the Superman thing of and then just walk away because he knows that he's better than that. And it's a great moment, followed immediately by that bar patron going outside and seeing his truck impaled into the light posts and stuff like that. And that is the least Superman thing in the world. And I can't stand it. It's a moment there for the audience because Superman doesn't even get the benefit of seeing what he did or knowing that dude's reaction or anything like that. That is the objectivist philosophy as a root problem and the antithesis of who this character is designed to be. And I think that is the issue at heart. This whole film, this whole DCEU under Zack Snyder's leadership or ownership can be reduced to that one singular moment. A moment that almost gets it right and that does something immediately self-serving to undercut it and it undercuts everything and undoes the qualities at hand. And that's the problem with Man of Steel. My daughter thought that the action was pretty cool. She's excited to see the next movie, and I'm excited to talk about Batman vs. Superman. We have a couple other movies before we get there, because there's some DC adjacent films that I want to touch on before we get to 2016's Batman vs. Superman, the movie that kind of may have wrecked and or birthed everything with the DCEU. Right in its kind of first outing. This was the first DCEU film, but really it's that one that's the foundational one. This one is the one that is the sub-basement, if you will. But yeah, there's qualities here that I think are present. I think it's well cast. I think it's a gorgeous looking movie, even if it's kind of fuggly in its color grading. I think the costume is pretty great. I think Henry Cavill is magnificent to look at, and is perfectly embodying who Superman ought to be. I think the problems with this film stem from the leadership of Christopher Nolan, who was producer, David Goyer, and Zack Snyder. And you don't get the full objectivist thesis entirely in this film that really comes with his other two installments. But the parts that are there and they are glaring. And it doesn't work for the character of Superman. Let me know what you think of this film in the comment area down below, but please keep it nice. I don't want to have to deal with a whole bunch of people atting me, but feel free to do that if you need to. I'd rather you direct it at me than at anybody else. So thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, do all that good stuff, and next time we're going to come to you with a review for Red 2 as the next DC film. Peace.